The Kukkamsu were the first to encounter humans and, being the Kukkamsu, they immediately attacked. It was an unwise decision. Our galaxy is vast, with only a handful of sentient species capable of interstellar flight. Foremost among them are the Amia, our people. Unknown to anyone else, the humans had quietly built a small domain for themselves in a remote, largely unremarkable corner of the galaxy. This domain consisted of just a few dozen colonies, primarily in systems close to their home star. Importantly, the humans had no idea that the Kukkamsu or any other sentient species existed. Given their relatively primitive nature and lack of experience in dealing with other species, one would expect humans to fare poorly in an initial encounter with the aggressive, or rather, uncompromising Kukkamsu. Surprisingly, this was not the case. Here's why. A Kukkamsu armed reconnaissance team discovered a small human settlement on a planet marked for economic exploitation by their coordinator, which passes for their government. The settlement had only been established for a few years, a decade at most, after the initial survey was conducted. True to their nature, the Kukkamsu set about burning the buildings to the ground. It's possible they didn't realize these structures were made by and inhabited by sentient beings, as semi-telepathic species like the Kukkamsu often lack a theory of mind. Their thoughts are transmitted by pheromones, so they don't need to extrapolate, and they aren't good at recognizing sentience in alien species. As they began torching the settlement, the Kukkamsu team leader shot flames into the first building, and then proceeded to set fire to a slightly larger two-story structure, seemingly oblivious to the fleeing humans. The Kukkamsu are formidable in size, measuring 5 meters long, with bodies a meter wide at most, and usually holding themselves 2 meters off the ground. When they rear up on their 4 hind legs, using their front limbs as either arms or legs, they become even taller. The leader of the Kukkamsu team, armed with a flamer and a multi-purpose laser, was tearing through the human settlement with little regard for the humans themselves. However, upon spotting a vehicle attempting to leave the settlement, he crippled it with a laser shot. Approaching the wreck to finish off the occupants, he found a typical human family, a male, a female, and 2 juveniles, cowering in the wreckage. The Kukkamsu leader hesitated momentarily, perhaps due to some instinct or training, but then he raised his flamer to eliminate them. In that instant, he realized that he no longer had a flamer or even the arm it was attached to. A human in a fully encasing armored suit had crept up underneath him and severed his limb before he even noticed. This human, armed with a large kinetic pistol and a sword, stood between the Kukkamsu leader and the human family. Despite being in shock and on the brink of catatonia, the Kukkamsu leader still had his laser mounted on his remaining arm. He aimed at the human and fired, but the human simply stepped aside, having already anticipated the shot. The human was so fast that, in the time it took the Kukkamsu leader to bring the weapon to bear, aim and fire, the human had already assessed where the blast would land and moved out of the way. The Kukkamsu leader kept firing, but to no avail. The last footage recorded by the helmet cam showed a blur of movement before the Kukkamsu leader met his end. This was the first casualty in the human-Kukkamsu conflict. The mysterious human who defeated the Kukkamsu leader was there for the same reason as the Kukkamsu themselves. He was an armed scout, one of 5 sent to the planet by a different human faction to prepare for an invasion. Humanity, as it turned out, was not a united polity. The faction that sent the scouts was engaged in a formalized conflict, which humans refer to as war, with the faction that had established the colony. This kind of internal conflict was typical among humans, with different factions and even sub-factions constantly at odds. Despite being lightly armed by human standards, the scouts were equipped enough to overpower the Kukkamsu. The human scouts, equipped mainly for stealth operations, carried weapons like monomolecular swords, which could cut through almost anything silently. The Kukkamsu, though heavily armed for dealing with dangerous animals, were outclassed by the human scouts who, with their active camouflage armor, managed to decimate the Kukkamsu team. Only 3 of the 20 Kukkamsu made it back to their ship, and instead of bombarding the human settlement from orbit, they fled, barely able to operate their ship. The Kukkamsu's failure to understand the true nature of the threat they faced led to their hasty retreat. The fact that the human scouts were there to prepare for an attack on the colony but ended up defending it adds a layer of complexity to human behavior that perplexes many scholars. Intraspecies violence among humans is not only common but also highly organized, with wars being a significant part of their history. Unlike most species, where conflicts are often resolved through displays of power or negotiation, humans engage in mass organized violence, or war, with elaborate rules and strategies. Humans are a carnivorous hunter species, which is unusual among sentient beings, who typically evolve from herd or flock species near the bottom of the food chain. The Amia, for example, subsist mainly on fruits and were preyed upon by Gia hawks, while the Kukkamsu were hunted by Mazu snakes. Each species has an ancestral predator that influences their fear responses. However, humans are unique in that their primary threat has always been other humans, leading to the evolution of a species that is not only physically formidable, but also mentally and culturally adapted to conflict. Humans have evolved over hundreds of thousands of years to cope with predation by other sentient beings, leading to a neural architecture that supports both physical combat and strategic thinking. Human culture places a high value on intelligence in conflict, with many societies dedicating significant portions of their culture to the development of warriors. The concept of war among humans is not just about killing but involves complex rules that govern who can and cannot be killed. For example, enemies who surrender or civilians are generally spared. One of the most universally respected rules is the protection of juveniles, which is likely why the human scouts intervened when the Kukkamsu attacked the human family. This protective instinct towards children is a key aspect of human behavior. The Kukkamsu, despite their initial aggression, were eventually forced to reconsider their approach after suffering significant losses in both space and ground engagements. Human factions, united by the threat of a common alien enemy, put aside their differences to form a combined fleet that overwhelmed the Kukkamsu. The human ships, though less technologically advanced, were numerous and specifically designed for combat, with tactics honed through centuries of interfaction warfare. The Kukkamsu, accustomed to simpler strategies of advancing and shooting, were no match for the complex maneuvers of the human fleet. Ground engagements typically ended in massacres, as the lightly armed human scouts were more than capable of decimating the Kukkamsu forces. This prompted the Kukkamsu to seek dialogue with humans. Surprisingly, humans were willing to make peace, despite their fearsome reputation as warriors. The humans' fascination with the first sentient species they encountered outweighed their outrage over the attack on the colony. This curiosity drove them to seek information and understanding rather than continue the conflict. The cultural exchange that followed brought humans into contact with other starfaring species, leading to the spread of human presence across the galaxy. Today, humans are found everywhere, studying and interacting with various species and cultures. The initial conflict with the Kukkamsu, though violent, ultimately paved the way for peaceful coexistence. The lesson from this encounter is clear: never underestimate the complexity of humans, and never, under any circumstances, threaten their young. As I conclude this lesson, I hope you take away a valuable understanding of the dangers of engaging in conflict with humans. Their unique evolutionary path, shaped by constant internal strife and the need to outthink and outfight other sentients, has made them a species unlike any other in the galaxy. If you ever find yourself in a situation where conflict with humans seems inevitable, remember this: the best course of action is to let other humans handle the fighting for you. They are, after all, exceptionally well suited for it. After the initial conflict, the galaxy held its breath, watching the aftermath of the human Kukkamsu encounter unfold. The galaxy had never witnessed a species like humanity capable of such coordinated violence, yet equally inclined toward intellectual curiosity and diplomacy. The Kuk-Kamsu, reeling from their unexpected defeat, retreated to their homeworlds, where their leaders debated their next move. For a species that had dominated their part of the galaxy for millennia, the idea of an unknown species outclassing them in battle was unfathomable. The Kuk-Kamsu, like many others, had never encountered a sentient species that was both so willing to engage in combat and so adaptable in its tactics. In the Kuk-Kamsu's central hive, their equivalent of a war council was convened. The debate was fierce. Some argued for immediate retaliation, advocating for the use of overwhelming force to crush the human threat before it could spread further. Others, more cautious, suggested a more measured approach, perhaps an alliance with other species who might also see the rising human influence as a threat. Meanwhile, reports from their scouts and spies suggested that humanity was rapidly expanding, not just in terms of territory but in their understanding of other species and galactic politics. The humans, it seemed, were quick learners, and their interest in other sentient beings went beyond simple conquest. On the human side, the shock of encountering an alien species for the first time was tempered by their success in the conflict. The various human factions, usually embroiled in endless wars with one another, found a rare moment of unity in the face of a common enemy. Diplomatic channels, previously used for negotiations between rival human factions, were repurposed for contact with other species. The Amia, long known for their wisdom and diplomatic prowess, were among the first to reach out. The Amia, who had watched the conflict with growing concern, extended an olive branch, offering to mediate between humanity and the Kuk-Kamsu. It was a bold move, considering the Amia's peaceful nature and the humans' reputation as warriors. The initial contact between the Amia and humanity was tense but ultimately successful. The Amia's diplomats, known for their ability to remain calm under pressure, were met by human representatives who, while wary, were genuinely interested in peaceful coexistence. The humans, it turned out, were as curious about the Amia as they had been about the Kuk-Kamsu. The exchange of knowledge began, with the Amia sharing their understanding of the galaxy and its many inhabitants, while the humans offered insights into their own history, culture, and technological advancements. The Amia were particularly intrigued by humanity's concept of war, not just as a means of conquest, but as a complex system governed by rules and ethics. Meanwhile, the Kuk-Kamsu were not idle. They were preparing for a war on a scale they had never before considered. Their fleet, though powerful, was not designed for prolonged engagements with a species as unpredictable as humanity. They began to adapt, studying the humans' tactics and reverse engineering captured human technology. The Kuk-Kamsu, despite their initial shock, were nothing if not resilient. They began to experiment with new strategies, incorporating elements of human warfare into their own doctrine. This included the development of specialized units designed to counter human speed and adaptability units equipped with advanced sensors and weaponry capable of matching human reflexes. As the Kuk-Kamsu prepared for a renewed offensive, the humans were also busy. Their expansion into the galaxy continued, with new colonies established in previously unexplored systems. These colonies, however, were not just outposts of human civilization, they became melting pots of different species. The humans, ever the diplomats when it suited them, began inviting other species to join them in these new worlds. The result was a series of multi-species colonies, where humans and aliens lived and worked side by side. This cultural exchange proved to be one of humanity's greatest strengths. The other species brought their own knowledge and technology, while humans contributed their unparalleled ability to adapt and innovate. The Amia, seeing the potential for a new era of galactic peace, took a leading role in these efforts. They helped to broker treaties and agreements, ensuring that the new colonies would be places of cooperation rather than conflict. For the first time in galactic history, species that had once been rivals found themselves working together toward a common goal. The humans, with their boundless energy and enthusiasm, were at the center of this new alliance. They were driven not just by a desire for peace, but by an insatiable curiosity about the galaxy and its many inhabitants. This curiosity led them to explore new frontiers, both physical and intellectual. However, not all species welcomed this new era of cooperation. Some, like the Kukkamsu, saw it as a threat to their way of life. The Kukkamsu had always been solitary, preferring to keep to their own worlds and their own kind. The idea of sharing space and resources with other species, particularly one as aggressive as humanity, was anathema to them. As the human-led alliance grew stronger, the Kukkamsu's fears turned to anger. They began to rally other species who were also wary of human expansion. The result was a growing coalition of species opposed to the new order that was taking shape in the galaxy. The stage was set for a new conflict, one that would make the initial skirmishes between humans and Kukkamsu seem insignificant by comparison. Both sides knew that the next war would not be a simple battle for territory. It would be a fight for the future of the galaxy itself. The humans, for their part, were determined to defend their new allies and their vision of a united galaxy. The Kukkamsu, on the other hand, were equally determined to preserve their way of life and their independence. The galaxy watched as these two powerful forces prepared for a confrontation that could reshape the balance of power forever. As tensions mounted, the Amia worked tirelessly to prevent the looming war. They organized peace conferences, bringing together representatives from all the major species, including the Kukkamsu and the humans. These meetings were fraught with tension, as both sides were deeply suspicious of the other's motives. The Amia, with their unparalleled diplomatic skills, managed to keep the peace talks going, but it was clear that war could break out at any moment. The humans, while attending these conferences in good faith, continued to prepare for the worst. They knew that if the Kukkamsu and their allies decided to attack, they would need to be ready. Behind the scenes, human scientists and engineers were working on new technologies designed to give them an edge in the coming conflict. These included advanced defensive systems, more powerful weapons, and faster ships. The humans were also refining their strategies, drawing on centuries of experience in fighting wars against their own kind. They knew that the key to victory would not just be in superior firepower, but in outthinking their enemies. The Kukkamsu, meanwhile, were doing the same. They had learned much from their initial encounters with humans, and they were determined not to be caught off guard again. The final spark that would ignite the war came when a human colony on the edge of Kukkamsu space was attacked. The attackers, later identified as members of a rogue Kukkamsu faction, destroyed the colony in a brutal assault that left no survivors. The human response was swift and decisive. Within days, a fleet was dispatched to the Kukkamsu border, demanding justice. The Kukkamsu leadership, while disavowing the attack, refused to hand over those responsible, claiming that they were acting in defense of Kukkamsu sovereignty. This standoff quickly escalated, with both sides mobilizing their forces for war. The first major battle took place in the Naru system, a strategically important sector located between human and Kukkamsu space. The Kukkamsu, having learned from their previous encounters, deployed their new specialized units, hoping to counter the human speed and adaptability. The humans, however, had anticipated this and had developed countermeasures of their own. The battle was fierce, with both sides suffering heavy losses. In the end, the humans emerged victorious, thanks to their superior tactics and the bravery of their soldiers. The Kukkamsu were forced to retreat, but the war was far from over. As the conflict dragged on, it became clear that neither side would easily back down. The humans, despite their initial successes, found themselves stretched thin, fighting on multiple fronts. The Kukkamsu, for their part, were determined to reclaim the territory they had lost and to prove that they were still a force to be reckoned with. The war quickly spread to other parts of the galaxy, drawing in more species and turning what had begun as a regional conflict into a full-scale galactic war. The Amia, despite their best efforts, were unable to prevent the escalation, and soon even they were forced to choose sides. The war brought out the best and worst in humanity. On the one hand, their determination and ingenuity allowed them to hold their own against a formidable enemy. On the other hand, the brutality of the conflict took its toll on both the soldiers and the civilians who were caught in the crossfire. Stories of heroism and sacrifice became common, but so did tales of atrocities and betrayals. The war changed humanity in profound ways, hardening them and deepening their resolve. Yet, even in the midst of this darkness, there were glimmers of hope. In some sectors, humans in Kamsu began to reach out to one another, finding common ground despite the bloodshed. As the war entered its third year, both sides began to show signs of exhaustion. The Kamsu, despite their initial bravado, were struggling to maintain their war effort. Their losses had been severe, and their resources were dwindling. The humans, though still capable of fighting, were also feeling the strain. The cost of the war, in terms of lives and resources, was becoming unbearable. It was at this point that a new player entered the scene: the Orcs, a mysterious and highly advanced species that had long remained neutral in galactic affairs. The Orcs, seeing the devastation caused by the war, decided to intervene. The Orcs' arrival changed the dynamics of the conflict. Their technology was far beyond anything either the humans or the Kamsu possessed, and their mere presence forced both sides to reconsider their positions. The Orcs, acting as mediators, brought the leaders of the human and Kamsu factions to the negotiating table. The negotiations were tense, with both sides deeply distrustful of the other, but the Orcs' influence and the sheer exhaustion of the war eventually led to a breakthrough. A ceasefire was declared, and a peace agreement was signed, bringing an end to the most destructive war the galaxy had ever seen. The post-war period was one of rebuilding and reflection. Both humans and Kamsu had suffered greatly, and it would take years, if not decades, for the wounds of the war to heal. The galaxy, however, had changed irrevocably. The old order had been shattered, and a new one was beginning to take shape. The humans, once seen as a minor power on the fringes of the galaxy, had emerged as one of its dominant forces. The Kamsu, though weakened, were still a significant power, and they had learned to respect their human adversaries. The Orcs, having played a crucial role in ending the war, became a key player in the new galactic order. The peace that followed was fragile, with tensions still simmering beneath the surface. Both humans and Kamsu knew that the next conflict could be even more devastating than the last. However, there was also hope that the lessons learned from the war would lead to a more stable and peaceful galaxy. The humans, for their part, were determined to ensure that their new allies and former enemies alike could coexist peacefully. They continued to expand their influence, but now with a focus on diplomacy and cooperation rather than conquest. The Kamsu, chastened by their defeat, began to explore new ways of interacting with the galaxy, seeking to build alliances rather than dominate through force. The story of the human Kamsu war became a cautionary tale for the galaxy, a reminder of the dangers of underestimating a species that had evolved to survive and thrive in conflict. The humans, for all their ferocity, had also shown a capacity for mercy and reconciliation. As the galaxy moved forward, the memory of the war remained, shaping the interactions between species and influencing the course of galactic history. And so the humans, once feared as deadly warriors, became known not just for their ability to wage war, but for their willingness to forge peace in its aftermath. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. For every comment that says we will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.